Alright, everyone. So I had a recent encounter with, well, something. I'm not sure what it was, as I never actually saw it. But the encounter seems to be in line with things I've read here and other places. So here it goes. It was approximately 2 weeks ago, just before Halloween. Now let me start by saying I'm not an avid outdoorsman. I love hiking, and I've spent countless hours in my city's 16 square mile state park, nature reserve, whatever you want to call it. But I'm not a mountain man by any means. The park is home to several indigenous mammals, birds, fish, and reptiles. A full pond, thick brush, and even swampy marshes in certain spots. There are designated hiking and biking trails that sprawl the entire area. But there are also several wild areas that aren't really maintained or used well. Being that I have an adventurous streak, and that I also hate being around groups of people, I often find myself in these less ventured or wild areas. Now, it's worth noting that I've never really felt uncomfortable in this park. It's kind of like my safe place. I go there to get away, decompress after work, or just to be alone sometimes. It feels like a second home in a way. Anyway, enough background information, I'm rambling. I just pulled up to one of the less commonly fished ponds, Beaver Lake, and I intended to circle the far side on one of the hiking trails that goes right next to the tree line, and then into the tree line, and then push further back onto one of the old horse trails. Now, this horse trail in particular doesn't get used much more anymore. I can't say why for sure, but I've heard a myriad of different reasons from different people. The most logical explanation is that it's just not as convenient to get to anymore, and it gets pretty marshy when it rains. I'd be able to follow the normal hiking trail for the first 3/4 of a mile, but I'd have to fork left off the trail once it went into the tree line. The gate to the old horse trail was about 500 yards to my 9 o'clock from there, just through an overgrown thicket and up a slight hill. I made my way over the 4-foot gate and started exploring. I had about an hour and a half before sunset, and I have a strict screw the woods at night policy, so I was watching the time. My main goal for this adventure was to snap some pictures of the area for a project that I had been working on, and I'll admit, I was more distracted than I typically am. Anyway, close to an hour had passed. I'd gotten some good shots, and I figured now was a good time for my egress. It'd take me close to 30 minutes to get back to my truck, and I wasn't keen on getting stuck in an unfamiliar area at night. I sat my backpack down on a stump, dropped to one knee, and started packaging and organizing my stuff. I am not sure what the catalyst was, but I suddenly felt this terrible sense of dread. I slowly turned and scanned my surroundings. Nothing seemed out of place. I stood up and grabbed my bag. When I took a step forward, a leaf crunched under my boot, and I realized that everything was dead silent. Now, as I said above, I am not an avid outdoorsman by any means, but I know well enough that silence like this is an indication that a predator is in the area, and you need to quickly but calmly make your way out of the area and stay vigilant. It's worth noting that while mountain lions and black bear are technically indigenous to my area, there have been more than enough caught and relocated for it to be a valid concern. I've been stalked by a mountain lion on one other occasion, and this felt eerily similar, so that was at the forefront of my mind. I'd been moving for probably 5 minutes, and everything seemed fine. I'd lulled myself into believing that I was just overreacting, and that everything was fine. I didn't see anything. I didn't hear anything. Good, right? Well, wrong. By this point, the trail was completely overgrown on both sides. I could see fairly clearly behind me and a decent way ahead, but my left and right may as well have been fall-colored walls. I must have gotten lost in thought for a moment, because I tripped on a root and ate shit. As I was picking myself up, I started hearing a soft, cooing or chittering off to my right. It sounded like a mix between a dove and the predator. It would start with a coo or yelp and end with this weird chittering sound. I'm actually sitting here trying to replicate it, and I sound ridiculous. I'm not sure my throat is even capable of recreating it accurately. Anyway, I'm out of shape and there's no way I'm outrunning anything. So I scrambled up, planted my feet, and tried to make myself look as menacing as a fat 22-year-old with a backpack and glasses can look. About 100 yards ahead of me, which would have originally been behind me had I not fallen, so toward where I was taking the pics was moving away from, I saw the underbrush start to shake, and it sounded like something was tearing through it. I only had maybe 20 minutes of daylight left at this point, and it would take me at least that long to make it way back to my truck. So, I did exactly what you are not supposed to do. Naturally, I turned around and I fucking booked it, knowing good and damned well that I can run for maybe a half mile. 3/4 of a mile if something's trying to kill me, maybe. I could barely hear anything over my own footfalls and the sound of my heart pounding. But whatever it was chasing me through the underbrush, and it was gaining on me. It may have been 15 yards behind me at this point, and I still had a ways to go. I don't know if fear kept me going or what, but I reached the deeper and just kept running. My breathing got shallow, my vision started to blur, and I was honestly about to collapse when I saw the gate to the horse trail about 300 yards ahead of me. This thing is right on top of me by now, and as soon as I came within arm's reach of the gate, I planted my foot on the bottom rung and launched myself over it. My landing was not graceful. I landed on my right shoulder and tumbled several yards down the hill into a puddle of muck. I wasn't thinking straight now, and I stood up shakily and started making my way toward the tree line and pond. I knew what direction to go, and I didn't even bother finding the hiking trail. I just crashed through the brush and overgrowth like some kind of barbarian. I didn't care about the cuts or the scrapes or even the massive amounts of noise I was making. My only thought was to get out. The chittering noises had stopped, but I still heard something moving in the brush at the top of the hill. It wasn't trying to be quiet anymore either. I finally broke through the tree line and could see my truck parked across the pond at the top of the hill. I finally took a deep breath and started slowly walking my way away from the tree line. The ominous feeling had lifted, and I started making my way up the trail alongside the tree line. I was able to catch my breath for about 15 seconds. I heard that god-awful cooing and chittering behind me again, and I turned to look back at the tree line behind me. So at the point, there's a trail leading into the tree line in front of me, tree line to my right, water to my left, and the trail leading alongside the tree line and around the pond to the cars behind me. The underbrush of the tree line ahead of me started to shake and fear took over. I'm thankful that my bag is waterproof and that my phone is water resistant because I jumped in the pond and I swam across. I've never really told this story to anyone in my personal life. They'd probably think I'm crazy, and I doubt they'd consider me reliable or credible, especially given my interest in Bigfoot and cryptids in general. I don't know what was stalking me that day. I know I wound up cold, wet, and a bit shaken up. I also know I've been back at the park, at least at that part of the park, and I can't come up with a good explanation. Beaver Lake is off limits to me for a while. I think I'll just continue exploring and hanging out on the slightly more populated side of the park. I was black powder hunting alone on a private property. The property has a gated entrance, and I parked my four-wheeler there, and normally walked in the remaining 200 yards to my elevated deer stand. As I shut my four-wheeler off off and put on my backpack, I heard a very large limb snap and thought it was a deer or animal moving around, maybe only 20 yards away. So I didn't think anything about it, gathered my gun and hunting stuff, and started walking down the 2-track trail without my flashlight on, due to having good enough light from the moon to see where I was walking. I hunted here a long time and knew the trail. This trail ended in a 15-acre hayfield surrounded by old-growth timber. As I walked in the dark, I quickly realized something was paralleling my every step just inside the woods. I walked and stopped, and it would do the same. By the time I realized I might have a problem on my hands, it was too late to go back to the 4-wheeler. So, I picked up my pace and made a beeline for my tree stand. When I got within 10 yards of the stand, I heard another large limb snap really close to the edge of the field on my left. I stopped, turned my flashlight on, and shined that in the direction. I seen 2 glowing green eyes about 10 inches apart. Instinctively, I raised my rifle and stomped my foot at it and yelled, "Get out of here!" Not really sure what I was saying. It just blinked its eyes once and never moved. I could not make out any details, just that it may have been crouched down due to the proximity of the eyes to the ground. Whatever this was didn't run like most non-predatory animals would. I realized that, in an instant, the best thing to do was bolt up my ladder and get in the stand as quickly as possible. This was no more than 8 steps away, and if I shot at it, I would have been blinded by the muzzle flash, and it might attack if I missed in the dark, and not having a way to reload quickly. I made an evasive move. The rest of the time I waited in the stand for daybreak, it circled my stand, just out of the light shine. Approximately 1 minute before daybreak, I heard bipedal steps go into the woods where it had followed me from. I waited till daylight and quickly made my way back to my 4-wheeler. As I jumped on the machine and just before I fired it up, I heard another branch or limb snap loudly in the woods off the trail behind me. I left the area and went back home and cut the week-long hunt short and didn't return until the following spring. I've never hunted the same way again since, and rarely go in before after dark on foot unless I absolutely have to. And if I do, I always have a sidearm. I've since sold that property and hunt in my home state of Indiana, and I could honestly say one thing for sure. If I had had a shotgun or a high-powered rifle in my hand with more than one shot, I felt threatened enough to use it that day. This thing was not scared of me at all, and it changed the way I look at the woods and forests forever. Thinking back on that morning and the days leading up, I now remember that I hadn't seen the normal wildlife signs and visual activity I normally saw. So, this happened back in 2010. I was 10 years old at the time. During this time, it was a snow blizzard. It hit our city out of nowhere, as our weather is known to be bipolar and have late winters. I lived with my cousins during this time. This blizzard went on for a while. Thick snow, freezing. This blizzard was so unexpected that nobody was prepared for it. Powers were going out, people buying out the water supplies in stores. I remember seeing on the news that people were using barbecue grills inside homes for warmth. This mainly occurred in less fortunate areas. Even though we lived in apartments, we were fortunate enough to have our power on and other needed stuff. To sum up how this blizzard was affecting us, it was so cold to the point trees were falling. I lived on a giant pond where if you go on our balcony, it would be water. Well, that was frozen. So me being the 10-year-old I am who doesn't want to play in the snow. So me and my cousin, who was 18 at the time, played out in the snow in the daytime. We practically did that every day whenever we got bored. But one day, him and I went outside in the parking lot, outside my apartment, basically in front of my home. The only difference was we went to go and play in the snow at 6 p.m., and it had already been dark by this time just because of daylight savings time. We wait until it stops snowing till we go out. So we were playing like normal, building snowmen and walls, anything normal you do in the snow, right? Well, we decided to attempt to make a snow wall, so we needed lots of snow for that. Now, it has been snowing heavy, and where's the best spots to get loads of snow? Off of cars that haven't moved, of course. We start building this wall, and I'm taking snow off of trunks of cars, and there's thick layers. It's the easiest spot to obtain a chunk of snow. After a few back and forward of getting snow off the cars and bringing it to the wall we were building, I notice I haven't touched my sister's boyfriend's car. Wow, that's a lot of snow they haven't left in days. I tell my cousin that let's go get that snow. We were walking towards my sister's boyfriend's car, and we are now at it. We arrive at the trunk, and as soon as I grab a big 2-armful of snow, a very loud click is heard. In confusion, I look around, and then look down and around the car. My cousin and I is a green light in the shape of a circle around us. Now this is freaky enough in the moment. I decided to look up to see what the source of this light was. And what do you know? Nothing was above us. So after noticing the light and nothing being above us, I look at my cousin and start running back home. I'm freaked out, running, looking around everywhere, and as I run home, checking my surroundings, I see a tree fall in the distance. Yeah, it was cold like I mentioned earlier, but this was common during a blizzard. But for this to happen at the moment of this weird phenomenon just adds more chills to the story for me. My cousin and I get inside, and inside was my sister and his sister cooking. We rush in, freaked out, and they're questioning what's wrong. We explain the chain of events that went down, and what do you know? Just like anyone who hears these type of stories, they said we were stupid, crazy, we need to stop playing, etc. Okay, they don't believe us, brush it off. Who would expect anyone to? Now for the rest of that night, my cousin and I just keep peeking out the window very often. Our minds could not clear that. We stayed up all night, kept peeking out the window. We played Black Ops until about 7 a.m., still peeking out the window every 5 minutes. This was not something we were just going to forget, let alone make this up. To this day, he still remembers this moment, a moment that should have been pure, normal fun, into a creepy extraterrestrial sighting, which I believe. I am 18 now, but the details are still clear as day, as I have thought about it often ever since that moment. It is not something you easily forget. My cousin and I talk about this here and there when we see each other, but man oh man, it was a freaky incident. Look, I don't expect you to believe me, but I have had this on my mind for way too long. It is just something too unreal to keep to myself. I have come here to share my experience, and I'm looking for thoughts. What are your thoughts? What could it have been? Why did it target us? Why didn't it do anything? To this day, I have one too many unanswered questions, and they will never be answered. I'm just going to have to live with that fact. To paint this picture, I was born in 2002, and my entire childhood, I was obsessed with fairies. At some point, I began to get pieces of paper and write messages to fairies. I would tape them in various fairy places around my house. I had one above my bed, and the last one I put up before I saw the fairies was on a chair on my outside porch. I always wrote asking them to visit me. I remember they finally came one night at 3:10 a.m. I randomly woke up and saw tiny little balls of light around my piles of books I kept in bed. Until this event, I had always pictured fairies looking like little people with wings. One of them, or a few of them, I don't remember, were singing something. I remember the lights were red, orange, and yellow. Unfortunately, although I had always wanted to meet them, After a few seconds, I screamed and ran to my parents' room and slept in their bed. The next day, I drew pictures of the light and showed it to my parents. I don't think I still have the pictures, but sometime soon I'm going to look around for it. I regretted running away from them, and once college apps are finished, I'm going to spend the winter trying to figure out what happened and if I can contact the fairies again. All of the things I've read online about people meeting fairies describe them as people. Do you think the balls of light were something other than fairies? Additionally, some people think that what happened was a dream since I was into fairies and it happened at night. But y'all gotta trust me that it was really real. This happened to me and my stepbrother around 7 years ago. My grandpa owns about 40 acres of woods, and he took us out there, and he ended up falling asleep. And me and my brother did the most cliche thing. We went to venture in the woods without telling my grandpa. We had walked in for about an hour when we saw a sheet of metal hanging on barbed wire. We were unsettled but curious nonetheless, and by now, we're in deep woods and we see a large tree up ahead, and we run up to it and see dead cows and their insides thrown all over the tree. At this point, we were terrified, and we began to run back the way we came. And as we're running, something was chasing us until we got back to the barbed wire, and it stopped. We made it back and told my grandpa, but of course, he didn't believe us. Fast forward to a couple of weeks ago, and one of my cousins is hunting out there, and they leave their truck overnight as it got stuck in the mud. When they returned, it had been lit on fire 3 to 4 miles in the middle of the woods. I plan on going out there with some friends and a couple of guns. Any advice? This seems like to be the only place I could possibly get some answers. When I was a little boy in the early 90s, I lived in Bandytown in Boone County, West Virginia, and as a kid, I remember being friends with this neighborhood boy who suddenly got snatched up while playing in the woods with his older brother and killed. The older brother claimed while playing he'd watched a huge black cat run up and grab his brother by the head or neck and took off with him. When they found his little body, it was torn up pretty bad from what I'd heard. His neck was broken and his face was partially eaten. But no one really believed the older brother's story about a panther, and officials just chalked it up to a bear attack. Although everyone involved agreed it didn't look like a typical bear mauling, which was common where I was from. They never found the animal during hunting, so parents around the area were definitely a lot more touchy about us playing outside at the time, and no one I knew was allowed to play outside at night anymore, because the old folks talked about hearing what sounded like a baby crying or a woman screaming deep in the mountains behind their houses. But a couple months after the boy's funeral, things settled down a bit, and I remember playing around an old empty lot near my home besides this huge mountain. I think I was down on the ground playing with a gardener snake or maybe some bug when I heard something that sounded like grunts and obviously got my attention. I lift my head up, and here's this big and slim black panther-like animal standing up from the tall weeds about 20 to 30 feet away, behind the fence that blocked the lot from the mountain. This thing was unlike anything I'd ever seen. I can't remember every detail, but its snout was long and chunkier, almost like a dog's, not like a cougar or cheetah. And its tail was very long, and it stayed in this J-like bend shape the entire time. It watched me for a while, not moving an inch and never taking its eyes off me with its head low to the ground and mouth slightly hung open. But my screaming and hollering scared it away, or it lost interest because it didn't take long after I started hollering for it to turn around and shoot back up the side of the mountain and out of sight. Still, to this day, I'd bet everything I own that what I saw was the same thing that had grabbed that little boy, because I only lived like 10 to 15 houses down from where he did, and was playing at. I remember back when Monster Quest still came on the History Channel, they did an episode about Appalachian big cats, and showed a few shots of supposed Black Panthers seen around the West Virginia and Appalachian area. It really hit me hard and brought up a lot of bad memories, to say the least. Please remember to be respectful. A child's death is never an easy subject.